Hi, everyone, and welcome to 35 Years and Counting, What's in a Band. My name is Kirsten Elliott. I'm the Development and Communications Director here at HawkWatch International, and we're really, really glad you could join us today. We, as many of you know, don't allow public access into our trapping blinds. This is one of the more sensitive pieces of work that we do in trying to study and conserve raptor populations, but we've always had a lot of demand for this kind of accessibility. And so we're really glad to be able to bring you today a 35-minute film where you'll get to see the banding process from start to finish. So before I get started, I just want to let everyone know that if you do have connectivity issues, we will be recording this. So no worries at all there. You'll get a recording in a few weeks via email. And we can also send you a link if you do start having issues in the middle of this. It's to a YouTube video, just so you can catch it if you want to try to watch it on your own, and then come back here for the chat. We hope that doesn't happen, but if it does, please drop us a message in the Q&A so that we can try to take care of that. Again, we're really glad that you all could be here with us today celebrating our 35th anniversary. I do just want to take a brief moment to say thank you to our sponsors. UAMPS is our presenting sponsor this year, but we have lots of other great ones as well. Caddis Enterprises, NextEra Energy, Ansec Polish Law, Rocky Mountain Power, Terracon, Enyo Renewable Energy, and Tab Bank, and Birds and Wine. So thank you to all of our sponsors who've made this possible. I'm going to stop talking now and let you all watch the film. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A or the chat. We'll be monitoring that. And then we will cut to Jesse Watson, who's our banding coordinator, for some Q&A afterward. So thanks so much, and we'll get started in just a minute.
The Goshute Mountains are so special. So much history involved and so many people that come up and talk about their time here.
It's just this big, beautiful, open space, and there's nothing around. You can't see anything but mountains. The sky is really soft and pink and blue at the right time of day, and I mean, pictures never do it justice, really.
Spread those channels more on the dome. Banding is a component of the work that we do that has been around since the beginning. So it is an integral part of the work that we do. We don't do it at all of our migration sites, and there's various reasons for that. It might just be the geography or logistics. But it is important work, and banding is a tool that's been around for over 100 years, and it's been used at the basic level to learn about the survival and movement of birds.
We want to know where the birds that we're counting go and where they're coming from. Banding birds is one of the old, reliable ways to try to do that. And we've been doing that with Goshutes since the 80s, and in a lot of our sites since the mid-90s. And so it's essentially, we catch the bird, we really quickly take it in and collect some data from it. How large is it? What kind of fat stores does it have in different places? Can we get an age on it? And then we put a band on it with a unique number. We get those bands from the bird banding lab, and then we send it on its way.
The real value is if that bird gets encountered years down the road, or even months down the road, because then you can plot 2 points on a map and you can say bird was captured here, bird ended over here, this is how long it lived, this is how old it was when it was banded. So a good example would be you catch a bird as a hatch year, first time it's migrated south, you put a band on it, you take the measurements, you submit that data, maybe in 2016, and then in 2019, maybe that bird is found dead in Mexico. So unfortunate that the bird's been found dead, but in that whole process, we learned a lot of information because we learned okay, the bird was a hatcher in 2016. Now it lived to 17, 18, 19. So we learned about age, longevity, survival, and we learned about where that bird moved to and from. So we don't know where it initiated, but we know maybe it was banded at the Goshute Mountains in Nevada, and it was found somewhere in Mexico. And so just from those 2 points and those kind of 2 simple acts, if you want to call them that, of banding initially and someone taking the opportunity who found the band to submit it, we learn a lot of information.
We put out hundreds of thousands of bands on birds over the life of the network. And we get some of those that we recapture. We get some of those that other efforts like ours recapture, or that rehabbers find, or that people find birds that have died and they've got a band. And it's important to look at that if you find a bird and report those numbers, right? And so each bird gives you a story, and collectively we can get those recoveries over time and get a geography of these are where birds that were banded at Bonnie Butte have been recovered over time, for instance, right? And you can look on a map and see if there's any kind of pattern to that, right? And actually, not only HawkWatch's efforts, but banding efforts in general have created, some people have probably heard of flyways. There's migratory flyways, and the ways that we've been able to delineate those flyways are from banding efforts and recovery efforts. We've also learned about how long some of these birds live, for instance, right? So we can age some birds. So a bird that's a hatchier bird, which means it's a bird that was an egg earlier in the year that it was banded. If we recover that, then we know exactly how long that bird lived, right? If it's a bird that's a little bit older, then we have an estimate. It's at least this old, for instance. And so you get some longevity records and learn about the lifespan, or at least the upper level lifespan of some of these birds that get recovered. We just recently had a red-tailed hawk recovery. The bird was banded in 1990 in the Manzanos in New Mexico, one of our sites. And it was recovered near Mono Lake, California, just this past summer. So that means that bird was almost 22 years old as a red-tailed hawk. That's useful information to kind of get, people always ask, how long do these birds live and where do they go? Some of the banding information lets us answer that question with data.
The bird banding lab, we call it the BBL, has been around for nearly 100 years. I think there's like 82 million plus records in their database of banded birds. And each year, I think there's around 1 million birds banded in North America. And so those individuals, like the birds that we band, which these days we're banding several thousand raptors across our migration network each season. And those individual records will be submitted to the banding lab, and they'll join that database. And then anytime we or some other organization or individual comes across an individual that's been banded, they can request that information, and it'll pop up when they should get a certificate if they submit the information, and they'll learn where and when that bird was banded.
The key thing is those markers have to be unique, right? There's only one band number that's like 1314 02347. And if you start getting those duplications, then you start to lose what you can say when you get those recoveries, right? So those central permitting and regulatory nodes are pretty important. And more recently now, banding requires permits at the federal level and at the state level. And there's different agencies that need to know why you're doing what you're doing, that you've got the experience and knowledge to do it well and to do it safely, and you're doing it for a reason.
Every one of our sites that does capture and band birds, which is 5 individual migration sites, they're set up differently. We kind of call it the trapping arena, and based on where we believe the birds are going to be coming in and prior experience and years of having an arena set up kind of dictates where our nets are. And so we typically have several different types of nets in each of our arenas. Mist nets, pretty common type of netting used to capture birds and bats. Those are kind of set up. There's some escape nets for birds that come through and then feel like they're done checking things out and then leave. And hopefully we catch birds in those. There's mist nets set up around the outside of the trapping arena. And at some sites we have what we call dogazas. They're basically a small flat net that if they get hit by a bird that is coming in, they fall down. And we have bow nets, which are manually triggered by the trappers. And that's kind of the last resort for capturing these birds. And what I mean by that is we use lure birds.
And so we usually have 3 different kinds of lure birds, pigeons, starlings, and house sparrows. These are all invasive species that are super abundant everywhere. And most of them we rescue from being euthanized from control efforts and bring them up here to help with our conservation efforts. But in the trapping arena, we need movement that looks like a food item to be able to convince a raptor to stop migration and take a break for a snack, right? And so those pigeons and lure animals go into a little leather vest that's kind of a flak jacket, and they get put on lines, and we pull them up into the air and they flap. And it's that flapping and looking like you're injured that will draw the attention of a raptor.
These birds are hungry. They might see one of the lure birds in the trapping arena and they get excited about that and they want to come check it out. And so they fly in and they try to capture those lure birds. And our goal as trappers is to try to direct those birds, the hawks, into one of those nets that I just described. And if we do our job well, the hawk will never even get close to the lure bird. They'll actually hit a net on their way in. And so we strategically set up each of the arenas to give us the best chance to capture those hawks.
And so we sit in a box with a very narrow slit called the blind because we don't want raptors to see us. We don't want to wear bright colors or move a lot or be loud because anything that seems off to some species, they'll just bail out of there, right? We lure and are watching and scanning the skies, and when we see a bird coming in, we look at shape and size and figure out what it is, and what it is tells us to shift to a different lure. So we start with the pigeon because it's a big, hardy, robust bird that can be lured frequently, but then when smaller species come in, we switch to the size appropriate potential prey so that they stay on and fly into the arena. It's a method, wildlife trapping method, that doesn't necessarily sit well with everyone, and we absolutely respect that, but we couldn't do the work that we do without using this method. And to us, it's the knowledge that we gain and conserving wild native birds of prey in North America is reason to use it.
After we've lured in a bird and we've caught it using one of the techniques I mentioned, so a bow net, a dogaza, or a mist net, the next procedure is to remove the bird from the net safely. So we sprint out or run out quickly, secure the bird. We're always watching for the feet. Often the birds will be on their backs because they're kind of caught in the net. And so we'll secure their feet first and start to untangle them. Ideally that happens in less than a minute. Sometimes they're a little more tangled, but it's pretty quick. And we pull them out of the nets and we carefully bring them back to the blind. We put them in a can is the first thing we do. And so we're communicating if the spotter runs out and grabs the hawk in the net, they might yell back and tell the trapper, oh, it's a sharp-shinned male. And the trapper might already know that just based on what they saw. And so they'll go, trapper will be in the blind, they'll get the can ready, and we have a whole different series of cans based on the bird, the raptor size. And so we essentially get that can, we put it on the scale, we tear it, which makes it start at 0. And the first thing the person with the bird will do when they come into the blind is place that bird into the can and weigh it. And the purpose of the can is essentially kind of twofold. It actually restrains the hawk and keeps it from struggling, but it's also dark and kind of calms them down. It keeps them from seeing what's going on. You think of like a falconer, if you're familiar with them, they'll put falconry hoods on their birds, and it's kind of the same idea. It's kind of like a blinder that keeps them calm. So we've got a juvenile male Cooper's hawk here, and the first thing we look at when we catch these birds is we try to sex them and we try to age them. We typically sex them by their morphometrics, so we've already done that. We've already banded the bird in the blind. But now we can take a little bit closer look and take a look at its plumage, which is simply just the feathers that this bird has. Accipiters, which are the northern goshawk, Cooper's hawk, which we have here, and the sharp-shinned hawk, they have two plumage-based age classes, simply meaning that they have a juvenile age class, which this bird falls into, and then an adult age class. Characteristics of a juvenile are this really kind of streaky breast that we have. All the feathers are the same age, which doesn't on its own mean it's a juvenile, but in this case we know that there's no molt going on. This bird came from a nest probably in the last couple months, and we caught it on its migration. And the accipiters typically transition with their eye from kind of a light milky yellow color, even a deep yellow color, all the way into like an orange, and then into a bright red. And actually this guy, when he's an adult, he'll have a nice bright, deep red, kind of blood colored eye. And maybe if we flip him over, Kirsty. Another characteristic that we use to age these juveniles and all the accipiters, specifically the Cooper's hawk and the sharp-shinned hawk, and we're looking at these buffy feathers on the back. So we've got these kind of dark feathers and these buffy tips. And an older bird, a second-year bird, may retain a few of these buffy tips kind of in this area on the rump. This bird has all of his buffy tips because those are the only feathers that he's grown. But next year he'll replace these. They actually come back with more of a little white etching on the outside. And he may or may not retain some of these, which would allow us at that point to say, oh, this is a second-year bird. And then beyond that, he gets more of a striking kind of grayish plumage on his back, and he'll have different aged feathers potentially at that point too, which helps us age him. And one last characteristic of a Cooper's hawk, they have this cool crest on their head on the backside, and he's really flaring that up right now, which you can see. And they can kind of lay that flat too, but he's a little bit alarmed right now, obviously with us staring at him and checking him out. So he's got that crest kind of flared up, and that's a nice characteristic to kind of determine what the species is if you see this bird at a distance. So I think now we'll just send him on his way and let him continue to fly south. In our blinds, we have a set of different size bands. They're numbered, so we have size 2, 3, 3B, 3A, all the way up until 9, 9A. So 2 being the smallest, that's a male sharp-shinned hawk. 9A would probably be like a large female golden eagle. Generally, each of those species, as we capture them, we know what size is appropriate, or at least what range of sizes are appropriate for those individuals. And so we use a leg gauge. When we capture a bird, we check size of the leg, and then that tells us which band is going to go on that bird. A common misperception is that they will grow as they age in size. So there's often concern from folks who haven't been around bird banding that if you add a band onto this bird's leg now that they're a juvenile, that their leg's going to grow and it's going to be too tight. And that is not true. As soon as these birds leave the nest, they're fully grown. And often they're actually larger than their parents, because they're just sitting on the nest being fed by the adults. So they'll actually be heavier. Their legs won't be larger necessarily, but again, the band size will not change on a bird as they age. The whole process is we have the bird in the can, we pull the bird, one of the legs out, we put a leg gauge on it, and we actually rotate the leg gauge just to see whether or not that size will fit. And if there's any rubbing kind of up and down on the leg and spinning it, then we'll bump it up to the next size. And then you get into the banding process. You choose the next band on the string, and all the bands are sequentially ordered. And so every individual bird that we band has a unique band code, basically. It's a 9-digit code, and it's unique to that individual. And there's no other bird in North America that has that band number, which is how we keep track of them. So they get the next band in the sequence. We're, of course, transcribing all this information into the banding data sheet. And then my practice is once I crimp the band onto the leg, then I'll spin it kind of all the way around and just make sure that it smoothly fits on there. All right, so we've got a Cooper's hawk here. This is a second-year bird. When we look at these birds, we try to do our best to age them. And so we're looking at the feathers, trying to look for any molt here, and they have typically 10 primary feathers. And so we typically will count from the outside. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This bird looks like, oh yeah, we have number 10 right here is actually coming in. it's in sheath. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then these are the secondary feathers here. You can actually see a retained juvenile feather right here. And those are being lost as the bird continues to molt. And that helps us keep track of the age and learn how old the bird is. So we can also look at the tail. We flip the bird over, and it's kind of the same idea. These birds will generally have 12 tail feathers. And so we count from the outsides, starting with 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So these are the central tail feathers. And we call these retrices. There's 12 of them in total. So you can see these two are currently growing in. And again, that helps us determine how old the bird is when we look closer at those feathers. And actually, this bird's the second year. And the way we can tell that is we can look at these upper tail coverts right here, and that's these little feathers. And you can look for these ones with these buffy tips. So these little guys, and they have this kind of buff color. And those are retained from when the bird was in juvenile plumage, which was last year. So this bird hatched over a year ago. It's replacing these, and all of his feathers are more grayish now. They lose these little buffy tips, and that's how we age it as a second year. The other cool thing with accipiters, which this Cooper's hawk is an accipiter, is their eyes will typically change in color over time. And so they generally start with a yellow eye as a juvenile, and then they kind of transition into kind of an orangish color like this bird, again a second year. And then over time they'll continue to get redder and redder and redder. Typically adult males have a really deep dark red eye. This is a female, right? And so this bird will get a red eye. It might not get as red as a male would. So typically, after we kind of determine what the age is and get some photos and documentation of the plumage and any evidence of molt, the next thing that we do is release the bird and kind of send it on its way. So Kirsty will do that now. The next step for me, what I typically do is go right to the tail. You know, the bird is in a can, and so the tail is sticking out, and it's convenient. So you pull the tail out and you put a ruler up against the body, and you measure the longest tail feathers, or the deck feathers, we call them the central tail feathers. And you get your tail measurement, and then I like to pull the wing out next, and we take a wing cord. It's essentially the length of the wing from the wrist to the tip of the primary feather, and we measure that. And then I like to take a wing pit measurement, which is a fat measurement. It's kind of an index of how healthy the bird is. We take a few or collect a few health indices for these birds, and one of those is wing pit fat. So essentially, you blow the feathers away under the wing pit, and if the bird has more built up fat, presumably the bird is healthier. And you can actually see the fat under the wing pit. It'll be like yellow colored fat that's kind of tucked in there. Then we go to the next two measurements that I like to take are keel, and that's just kind of the breastbone, and you can see how much muscle mass is there. If it's really thin and skinny, presumably, again, the bird is maybe less healthy. But if it's very rounded, you know, the bird is doing quite well. And often those first two that I described kind of match up. Like you've got a well-rounded keel and you've got a lot of wing pit fat. So we've got an adult female sharp-shinned hawk here. You can tell the first thing that I see when I look at her is striking red eye. So we talked about accipiters' eyes typically transition from kind of a yellow to orange to dark red, and that's clearly happening here. So probably an older adult here. You can see there's less streakiness here and this nice coloring on the breast. Again, sharp-shinned hawk, they're our smallest accipiter species and our most common species that's captured and observed at our migration sites. Maybe if we spin her around, we'll see the kind of the slaty gray color on her back. So if you think back to the juveniles that we've looked at of both Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks, they kind of have more of a brown color tone versus these birds that have this nice slaty bluish gray, beautiful markings. So another fun kind of interesting thing on this individual that we happen to have is she's got a full crop, and essentially that just, we're talking about this area here. You can see this big bulge, and she's just probably eating a songbird or something like that. So she's got some food in there, she's doing well, and yeah, sometimes if you look up and see birds flying over, you'll actually see that bulge on their crop, and sure enough, she has one. As we're banding these birds, we're always looking to see if there's any parasites or anything running around on the birds. Sometimes we see feather lice or flat flies. And at this point, we're not collecting those for any reason, but various projects will collect those little critters just to kind of analyze them and learn more about them. But it's kind of also an idea of how healthy the bird may be, or if there is any type of pest or insect that's crawling around on them. And then after that, we jot down some notes about the color of the eye. On Buteo species, it's often like a light color and then transitions into a brown as those birds age. We jot down notes about that. In some cases, we'll collect a feather if we're looking for genetic samples for various projects that we'll contribute to. Sometimes there's blood collected. Occasionally, satellite transmitters are attached for other studies. We'll take the birds out into the sun so we can see them a little better, and quickly take some photographs and look closely to see if there's any active molt occurring to understand the age of the bird. Sometimes it's very obvious. You can say, oh yeah, that's an adult. Juveniles are the most obvious. Typically, the juvenile birds that we handle in most species and species groups, so accipiters and buteos, to an experienced bander, it's pretty obvious, like, oh, that's a juvenile. And at that point, you don't really look at the molt too in depth because it's their first set of feathers, and there shouldn't be very much variation. As they age into second year and beyond, they begin to replace those feathers. And so that takes a little bit of analyzing and looking very closely. And sometimes you just can't tell what you're looking at. It's just too hard because the feathers look so similar. But with experience and photo documentation, you can always come back and review those images. And so we do our best when we have time to collect those images from birds that are older than hatch year. And then we can go back and have a nice library of what we've captured. And historically, there haven't been a lot of good resources, especially like photo guides to look at and really compare individual birds to figure out if they are a male or female, or the minutia that you see that can separate different ages of birds. And so myself, Jerry Ligori, Dave Oliar, through HawkWatch International, and Frank Nicoletti from Hawk Ridge in Minnesota, we put together this banding in-hand guide to diurnal North American raptors. And you can use this to really aid when we have birds in hand. And then at that point, all that occurs in maybe 15, 20 minutes for one individual. In some cases, it could be 5 minutes if we're not taking photos, 5 or 10 minutes. And then we make sure the skies are clear and we release the bird, and it typically continues on south. We've got 2 male sharp-shinned hawks here, our most common observed and captured species here at our migration sites, and really nice comparison of a juvenile over here and an adult bird on my side. So you can see the first thing you see is probably like the obvious differences in the eye color. There's a nice transition from this light yellow to orange, and if we had another bird, it would be kind of that reddish bright color. And then on the back, if we spin them around, you can see this nice comparison of this slaty gray again with the brown hair, those buffy tips, and a nice comparison of these two birds. Spin them back around. And the breast, you can see that this real streaky breast on this bird, and then kind of the barred or this kind of orangish look across the breast here. So same species, just at least 1 year difference.
This guy was an egg this summer. This one has seen a couple summers.
Yeah, at least it's an after hatch year, so we didn't go beyond that with aging, but maybe with a lighter orange eye, it could be a second year bird, but we couldn't confirm that. There's exciting opportunities on the horizon as far as the utility of banding and other opportunities we can explore as far as having birds in the hand and capturing individuals. With technology improving, there's more and more opportunity to tag smaller individuals, species that historically you couldn't track with satellite transmitters because the technology was not there yet. So transmitters are too large, the batteries are too heavy, and they couldn't hold a charge very long, which resulted in preventing us from being able to tag smaller species like the sharp-shinned hawk or American kestrels, even broad-winged hawk and Cooper's hawk. A lot of the birds that have been tagged in the past are very large, like bootios species, red-tailed hawk, ferruginous hawk, golden eagle. And so as time progresses and things become more miniaturized and advanced, we'll have more opportunity to tag and track smaller individuals. So with banding, we get a lot of information that is very valuable, especially when that bird is recovered. Again, we have the 2 points where we banded it, hopefully it gets recovered, and we have another point, we can plot that on a map. With satellite telemetry, we can put a tag on a bird, and maybe we put fewer tags out because they're very expensive. But if we tag 10 sharp-shinned hawks, for example, versus banding 500 sharp-shinned hawks, if we band 500, maybe we get 1 or 2 re-encounters, and we can plot those 4 points on a map. But if we tag 10 sharp-shinned hawks with a satellite transmitter, we'll get a bunch of tracking locations, and we'll be able to plot those points on a map and say, this is exactly where these individuals went. And the utility of that is very valuable information that historically we've never had. So those are kind of exciting horizons, and I see that being something that HawkWatch International will probably pursue in the future. And so, you know, as someone that's wanting to support raptor research and conservation, those would be good opportunities, whether that's providing funding to fund an effort like that, or just support those kind of efforts when those do come down the pipe in the future.
So yeah, this is a female. They have these beautiful long wings, long thin wings and long tails. They're really not too big. They're pretty small with really long legs. But you can see with this bird, she has a bit of a facial disc, kind of like an owl. She has kind of a flat face. Males have lighter eyes, even as juveniles, and when they're adults.
A lot of crew members will come in and they haven't had the opportunity to band raptors. Some have never had the opportunity to band birds in general, but banding raptors, it's tough to get those opportunities. And people are always excited about being able to handle raptors and have that opportunity to work closely with them. And if you work at any of our migration sites that bands, you'll have that opportunity to get hands-on and really learn, you know, how to age these birds, how to sex these birds, how to learn more about them in the hand and safely handle them. You know, you may come in onto a crew and handle 20 to 200 to 400 birds in a season. And so doing that in 3 months is an incredible opportunity, especially if you've never banded a bird and like it's your day number one and you're scared and you're nervous and you don't know what you're doing. But you learn from us and from our crew members who have more experience. And then all of a sudden you leave in 3 months and you're like, whoa, like you have a banding resume. And you have information on there that's really valuable to you in your career and your future.
Being here at this HawkWatch site is really great for me because I came in with very little experience. And they're excited to train me, they're excited to give me that introduction to this field that I didn't have before.
I'm pretty new to these trapping methods, so that's like a really, really huge stepping stone for me, is learning more about different ways to catch birds.
The first raptor that I got to band this fall, and the first one that I was there for the capture, was a Cooper's hawk. It is a very special moment to get to look a raptor straight in the eye and say, all right, we're gonna release you and thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll see you at another banding station down the road.
So that'll gradually change in color, which is really cool.
Just the opportunity to show raptors up close to the public is really valuable and exciting. So though, you know, we don't offer the opportunity for the public to band birds, but certainly to see them up close and to be educated by our crew members, who our crew members rotate on a daily schedule. So one day they might be counting and identifying raptors, the next they may be banding, and the next they may be on quote-unquote education or interp, where their job is to be the one to take a Cooper's hawk out and say, hey folks, this is a Cooper's hawk, this is why, this is what makes it a Cooper's hawk, and I want to show you these details, and hey, would you like to release that bird? And that impact that experience and opportunity has on folks is unparalleled.
If the bird is in good shape and seems fine and not stressed and everything's happened quickly enough, then we will show those birds to visitors before get sent back onto their migration route, right? And so seeing a bird of prey up close in hand, and in some cases with the smaller birds, we'll even allow people to safely hold and release those birds. And we do that so they can make a connection, right? Holding a hawk in your palm and then seeing it go and knowing that it's going to go thousands of miles away. That's a piece of wildlife you see from afar, or maybe you've never seen before, but you make that connection, and that connection can resonate with a lot of people. That's another important component of our banding operations is just to make that connection between people and birds of prey.
If you've never been to a raptor migration site, now you know much more about it. This is your opportunity to really get online, figure out where the closest site is. Maybe that's a HawkWatch International site. And we encourage you to come out, visit our crew, spend time with the crew, learn how to identify and count and learn more about raptors, and contribute and spread the word to other folks. You might have an opportunity to release a hawk potentially, and get inspired and make a change and difference in raptor conservation.
All right, everyone. Well, I hope that you enjoyed the video and getting to see inside the blind. Again, something that we don't let most people do. So I hope that was an enjoyable experience for you. We've had a few questions come in the chat and the Q&A, and so we're going to move on to that portion. So if you haven't had a chance to put your questions in, feel free. We'll take as many as we can over the next 20 minutes or so. And again, I just want to say a huge thank you to our sponsors. This truly would not have been possible without them sending crews to remote mountaintops everywhere. And also want to let you know that if you're attending for free and you want to make this counting and banding continue to happen for the next 35 years and beyond, you can make a charitable gift at hawkwatch.org/donate or by texting HawkWatch, all one word, to 56651. All right. Now, let's get into some questions. And the first one that we had was asking where we filmed most of this. And so I mentioned that in the chat, but in case you missed out on that, we filmed this at a variety of our HawkWatch International sites: Commissary Ridge in Wyoming, Chelan Ridge in Washington, Bonnie Butte in Oregon, and the Goshute Mountains in Nevada. So that should answer that. But now we'll go into some more technical questions and see if Jesse can give us some answers. So Jesse, first question is, do you ever use rodents as lures?
Yeah, thanks, Kirsten. I will mention about the migration sites, just because you said something about them. To any folks that live in those states, all those sites are open to the public. And so they're not exclusive to you all. So if you live in Washington or Wyoming or Nevada, you can walk out and drive out to a site and visit it. So I recommend doing that. But yeah, as far as the question goes with the rodent prey as lure, we typically don't use rodents. The thing about our migration sites is that the sites where we do band and capture birds are located in pretty remote areas up on high ridge tops. And so caring for rodents in those scenarios is challenging, but also the nature of the trapping that we're doing, these birds that we're catching are migrants. And so they're on the move. And so you'd really have to get fairly lucky to have rodent lures be successful. Hence the reason for using birds as lures, because they're fairly flashy, and the movement that they have when they're in the trapping set attracts the hawks much better. And as far as capturing the second part of the question, which was does using avian prey bias our capture statistics? I mean, I guess depending on how you ask that question, it does, because we don't use rodents as lures, but at the same time, we're not really worried about our capture statistics. At the end of the day, we just want to capture birds safely and ban them quickly and appropriately and get them on their way. So we're not too worried about, we're more worried about capturing the bird safely and doing it right than capturing more birds and sacrificing the safety of the bird. Oh, and then do you want me to keep answering this question? I could see
maybe let's move on and we can come back to that if that's okay, Jesse.
Sure,
so we were talking about the sites earlier, and someone asked about the remoteness of the Goshute Mountains site. Is it hard to access?
Yeah, yes and no. It depends on your ability and your comfort level hiking. Among our ridgetop sites, which 5 of the 7 long-term sites that we currently monitor raptor migration at are on ridgetops. The 2 that are not are Corpus Christi, which is in the town of Corpus Christi, very easy to access, and the Grand Canyon, which of course you can drive right to. So the other 5 sites are on some sort of ridge, and they are kind of all varying levels of difficulty to get to. The Goshutes is the toughest, and so it's, all of the sites are about 45 minutes driving to the nearest small town, and then at that point for the Goshutes, it's another probably 1.5 to 3 hour hike, and so it is a challenging site, but it's worth it once you get to the top.
Jesse, if someone is looking to visit a HawkWatch International site that is not the Goshutes, but that is, kind of similarly remote and maybe a little less visited, where would you recommend?
Commissary Ridge would be my #1 recommendation. Commissary Ridge is in Wyoming, really remote, given that it is in Wyoming, low populations and far away from a population center. It's about 2 hours away from Salt Lake City, but it's very easy to access. You can drive right to the site and you can just walk up the hill and be there very easily. So it's actually the easiest of our ridgetop sites to get to. But beyond that, Chilean Ridge is pretty easy to access as well. The road is decent, mountain road that you got to drive up, and Bonnie Butte is easy to get to as well. It just has a poorer road. Since I've gone through all of them, Manzanos is one of our other sites in New Mexico, and it's a couple hours out of Albuquerque, generally on a pretty good road as well, and easy to access. And all those sites except for Commissary Ridge, all those mountaintop sites, do have about probably at least a 45-minute hike in from the parking lot, with the Goshutes being the toughest hike again.
Perfect. Well, I'm glad that there's so much interest in visiting HawkWatch International sites. We hope you'll join us maybe next year. It's getting kind of late in the season now. Jesse, in the video, you showed the in-hand guide to diurnal raptors of North America, which is a book that we published last year. Someone is asking if there is one like that for nocturnal raptors.
Yeah, it's a great question. Unfortunately, there's not. There just is not a resource like that for nocturnal birds, nocturnal raptors specifically. So that's something we've discussed doing in the future, and I can't say whether or not it will be happening. We certainly are not currently working on that, but during any work that we do on owls in particular, we certainly do our best to collect data and information that would potentially go into a resource like that. So yeah, stay tuned. No promises, but I would love to if we could.
I would love that too. And so I'll make another quick fundraising pitch, which is that if you would like to see more things like that happen at HawkWatch International, we could really use your support this year. You can donate at hawkwatch.org/donate or by texting HawkWatch to 56651. Okay, back to Q&A. Jordan wants to know if you can tell the sex of the bird by the wingspan.
Good question. The short answer is, in most cases, yes. We don't actually measure wingspan proper. We take what is called the wing chord. And so that one clip of the video where I'm measuring from the wrist of the bird to the longest primary, that's the measurement that we take for wing. You could take a full wing measurement by spreading both wings and measuring it that way, but that's unnecessary. Typically, those two matching wings are very similar in length. They actually will differ by a couple millimeters in some cases. But most species you can sex by a combination of wing chord, weight, and tail measurements. You can usually get the sex of a particular species using those measurements. But red-tailed hawk, one of our more common species that we come across and see, they're pretty tough. They have a lot of overlap in their size, and so getting just a wing chord from them is not enough to tell you if it's a male or female. So we usually leave those birds as unknown.
Great question, great answer. Okay, we're going to move on to one that's, a little more controversial about the banding process, and this revolves around the stress for the raptor. And this is actually part of why we did this video. We really wanted to be open and transparent about what this process looks like and the scientific value, and that we take this really seriously. So, Jesse, this is a stressful time for raptors being on migration, and banding obviously is a bit stressful. Do you ever consider feeding a newly banded bird before you release them to compensate for the stress, or anything more generally that you can say about how we mitigate stress for the bird during banding?
Yeah, it's a good question. We get that question fairly often, and the short answer is no. We don't interfere with their diets and feed them. You would need to be properly permitted to do something like that. The nice reality is that these birds are generally, if they have enough energy to be flying and migrating by, they are strong enough and healthy enough to catch the next bird or the next prey item that they see. And so, we are permitted to do this work, and we know that it is stressful and inducing additional stress for these birds during a tough time migrating. But we also, as we've described in the video, think it's important work, and we think that what we learn from the data we collect is valuable enough to justify that quick inconvenience. And so, in most cases, we're capturing these birds and banding them within 10 minutes and releasing them. And so, I can't speak to a bird and get their exact thoughts on the process, but I would imagine pretty soon thereafter, after they've been released, they've forgotten about the inconvenience, and they're back to just hunting and migrating. And so I think that's my response.
Great. Thanks for taking time to address that head on, Jesse. Another question that was part of a multi-part earlier. So obviously we're luring these raptors in with, something that looks like a food item for them. But vultures don't eat in the same way that most raptors do. So what do we use to lure in vultures?
Yeah, it's a fun question. We don't catch vultures. I would love to. That's always the ongoing joke. Vultures and osprey are the birds that we always joke about wishing we could see up close and capture. So there's always lots of jokes about when is HawkWatch going to bring a kiddie pool up and put fish in it so we can catch an osprey. But we don't catch osprey. We don't catch vultures. Just their mode of hunting, and in the case of vultures, scavenging is just not conducive to capturing them on migration. And so they get a pass. We just get to watch them migrate by, and we're happy with that.
Would be really neat though. So again,
when they come close, we all get excited and hold our breath, but they are curious. Sometimes they'll fly by and look at a bird or look at a lure bird or look at the set and kind of check it out and then just kind of cruise on south.
Another question here, back to guides and things that folks might look for if they're, involved in banding some way, Jesse. Mike was asking if we use the pile guide for bird banding. In particular, he's asking about the identification guide to North American birds. So maybe you could answer that, and also how HawkWatch International's in-hand guide differs from that.
Yeah, it's a good question. historically, that has been kind of the only resource that's been out there, unless there's been like an in-house sort of guide within an organization that group uses for banding. The POW guide is very extensive and covers many or all the different species in North America. But what it lacks is photo documentation and photos of birds, which you can't really express in verbiage or in text. Like if you're trying to describe the color of a feather or something like that, it's very tough to get that across in text. And so that's why we kind of came up with the in-hand guide to diurnal North American raptors. And so we don't use the POW guide. We're confident in our guide, and in my opinion, it's a better resource for banding raptors. And so my recommendation would be, if you're doing raptor banding work with diurnal birds, you should be using our guide, and I wouldn't use the POW guide.
Great. What about who HawkWatch International coordinates with regards to this long-term monitoring research, Jesse? So specifically, someone is wondering if we coordinate with Cornell and/or eBird.
Yeah, good question. We don't technically coordinate with either of those. There's certainly many of our crew members are birders in general, so they're e-birding, daily checklists from the count site or whatever. In addition to the raptors, which they're there to count, also documenting like songbirds and other birds that are moving through. So we're happy with that. That's a cool thing to do. HawkWatch International has an eBird account that will sometimes tag those checklists in. On a bigger scale, I think the better answer to that question would be, we coordinate with HMANA, which is the Hawk Migration Association of North America. And you earlier shared a link to someone's question about hawk watches in Michigan, which on that topic, there's some phenomenal hawk watches in Michigan. So check out the one in Detroit and Mackinac Straits and Whitefish Point. Those are very well-known raptor migration sites. And yeah, so you're in a good state to watch raptor migration. But we work with HMANA, and we contribute our data to HMANA, which kind of a clearinghouse for raptor migration data across the continent, and also Central America as well. And you can go on there, on that website that I think has been shared, and you can go to Hawk Count and you can see where all the migration sites are. You can look at historical data, and you can request data if you have questions, or you're doing a scientific study, those type of things. And so in the collaborative sense, with migration in mind, those are the groups that we coordinate with most.
Great. And then one last question. See, we're getting questions at the last minute because people are running out of time. We've still got time for a few more questions, but if you have any, please get them in the chat quickly. Jenna wants to know about volunteer opportunities with HawkWatch sites for people who live outside the US, specifically for Canadians. And this seems like a good question for you, Jesse.
Yeah, that's a good question. It'd be fairly tricky to volunteer and contribute to the sites where we are doing work if you're not in those states. Certainly, obviously, financially, that's a way that can assist us with our migration sites if you're not there and you want to support them. But if you're Canadian or living somewhere else, again, you can go to hawkcount.org and you can check out your province, and you can see if there are any hawk migration sites in your province. So I'm not sure which province you're in, but there are well-known sites in Alberta. There's a very well-known site in southern Manitoba, and other sites. Kluane has a really good migration as well. And so, there's birds migrating, and if there's not a migration site, a formal migration site, my recommendation would be to learn more about what kind of features these birds are using to migrate, big north-south mountain ridges and those types of things, and spend time in those areas if you are a bird watcher during the time when you would expect birds to move. So you can kind of look at the timing based on numbers that you might see in Hawk Count. again. And if you spend time at a ridgeline in those time periods, you might see raptor migration.
And if you didn't tune in last Thursday night for our presentation with Dr. Dave Oliar about hawk watching, how we do it and why, Dave shared some of those concepts about what raptors are looking for as they're migrating and, you know, how you might find a good spot. So if you want to make sure you don't miss that, definitely grab a ticket to the gala and you will receive the recordings via email. Okay, I'm going to call this our last question, and I've been told it's a silly one, although I do not think it is. Do you get any Wi-Fi or cellular connection in the banding blind, or is everything still done pretty much old school pen and paper?
Yeah, good question. Most of our banding blinds, we probably do get some form of cell phone reception, but we still use pen and paper is the short answer. My preference would be to switch to a digital format, and we have done that with our migration counting data, our observation counts. So we use a tablet for those counts. We use an app called Dunkadoo, and the cool thing about that is you don't actually need to be online to log those data. And so we use Dunkadoo, we log the data all day, and then at the end of the day, we just turn on hotspot and we submit the data and it just syncs. And so that's certainly the direction that these type of things are going towards. It's just much cleaner, less effort, less time at the end of the day tallying up your numbers and knowing what went on during the day, when historically you'd be, you know, freezing, huddling under a light trying to summarize all the numbers from the day. Now you can just click a button and it submits them. And so personally, I'd like to move towards that with the banding data as well. And I think we probably will. I imagine us all as banders in the next decade will probably look back and laugh that we so recently were scribing data into paper.
Okay, there was one last question that came in and we still have a minute. So I'm going to give this one a chance. Do you have any suggestions for colleges or schools if someone wants to study ornithology?
Ooh, good question. Yeah, and I will say, back to my last comment, we use Goal Zero for our work at the migration sites, and so they kind of keep us powered, and we couldn't keep our tablets charged from day to day to day, so we appreciate that. As far as going to school and like where you could you know, get a degree that could lead you down a path to do work like this, there are lots of different options. You know, there's schools like Cornell that is very well known for bird research in general, but that, you know, you don't have to go to Cornell to do bird work. I went to Washington State University, and then I studied up in Canada at the University of Alberta, and those were just one school was a wildlife ecology degree, the other one was an ecology degree. I see someone says Oregon State University. There's many different schools that have opportunities to do wildlife work, and then it really, beyond getting that degree, time in the field and field research focused on birds is your best bet to kind of lead you down a path to do bird related work. And then I'll say lastly that Boise State University actually has a raptor biology program to get a graduate degree in. And so I think, as far as I know, that's the only one in the world that exists. So that's very specific. And if you're in the West, you know, fairly localized, which is pretty neat.
Great. Well, Jesse, thank you so much for being here to field questions and helping us create this film. We're really grateful for your time, and we know you need to run to your next meeting at the Raptor Research Foundation conference.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks everyone. And feel free to reach out. Folks can reach out if they have specific questions. I'm happy to have my email in the chat if you want to put that in there. And yeah, hope I answered your questions. Hope you got inspired and come and visit a HawkWatch sometime.